Tyne Morgan is our other keynote that we have today. I remember Tyne when she came in a PR role, and you just knew that she didn't need to stay in a PR role. Come on up here. And then she became a farm broadcaster, and I was like, whoa, look out. This girl has got game. She knows what to say. She knows what to do. Now, one of us is on television, and the other's not. Can you guess which one's on TV? Is there any doubt why?
Jeff, I will say, I think television is easier than radio.
I don't know.
It is. When I have to fill in for Chip Flory doing Agri Talk, TV is easier than radio. I will say that now.
Okay, I've got your bio here, and it's really cool, okay? But I want to share this with you. There was another broadcaster from Kentucky. Don't hold that against him or me, either one. Stuart Doan. And Stuart was passionate about agriculture. And he worked hard covering cotton and rice and corn and soybeans. And if you think I'm a policy wonk, I can't hold a candle to Stuart. But we lost Stuart several years ago, much too soon. Had a heart attack. And it was, just bless his heart, he was in the ambulance going to the hospital, and he was on his phone trying to reschedule interviews, okay? And he just, a few hours later, passed away. But we established an award in the National Association of Farm Broadcasting to honor excellence in broadcast. And the young lady standing beside me won the Doan Award last year, which I would suggest is the most highly coveted award within farm broadcasting. There is a person who can tell you the features of a story. We can give you the crop numbers, we can do the other things, we can tell you about stuff. But it takes someone special like this young lady right here to be able to help you feel the story and understand what's going on. She is that next generation of broadcaster that is a mom, that is a husband, that understands your business and has the opportunity to speak on your behalf to literally millions at a time. And I just can't imagine or impress upon you the amount of weight that's on her shoulders that she gladly carries in the name of broadcasting, in the name of serving great people like you. And my friend and yours is Tyne Morgan. Tyne?
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it. Thank you. Very sweet, Jeff. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And coming from someone like yourself, that the rest us farm broadcasters that may be a little bit newer in our careers look up to. So I appreciate you so much, Jeff. Well, we're going to take a look at kind of the landscape of agriculture, not only today, but possibly what's to come. A lot of things have happened already in 2023. Just when you think there couldn't be anything possibly more that could be thrown at the markets or at us. I mean, 2022 was a year of black swan events. I look back at 2022 and how many, we've never seen this before in our lives. How many of those events can happen? I think that 2022, there was one of those, at least one every month. So 2022 definitely was a pill to swallow for many. But there's a lot of good aspects of 2022, and really that kind of lays the foundation for this year and what we're watching. So we'll get into that in a minute. But one thing that you don't necessarily see on TV is the kind of the personal side of me. And I do have a life outside of television. Jeff says there's a lot of weight on my shoulders. Well, last year I kind of made the decision, I like all of us, social media and just the day-to-day demands of a job, they can wear on you. They can really burn you out. And I kind of last year got to that point where I just hit a wall and thought, we didn't have a reporter at the time. There was a lot of, the news never ends. And it was a year when the news truly, there was something new every morning, every afternoon, every night, and I felt like I needed to cover it all. So it did burn me out. And so I decided, you know what? Nope, it's time to focus on family. And the conversation actually happened because my husband, he works as well. He doesn't travel as much, but he started traveling a little bit more. And so the oldest is the blonde there, and my husband went on his first trip that he had been on in a while. And she's walking around the house, carrying his picture, just sobbing with tears. I said, "What is wrong, Kinsler?" And she looks at me and she said, "Mom, I just love my dad. And everyone loves my dad. I mean, they only love you because they love my dad." And I said, I don't know what type of brainwashing has gone on in this household, but it is time for me to stop traveling as much. And so I did have a talk with my husband. He swears he did not plant that seed in her head. But, I think about our community and our town, and for the longest time, we're a town of 800. Made the decision to move back home, and we chose this small town. Best decision that we made. But it is a true small town, and we have a local cafe that if I do cook, I promise that. But if I'm traveling and I get home late, I don't want to cook. I'll admit that too. So we do frequent our local cafe. And I found out that there's a lot of people, if you didn't farm, there's a lot of people in our town that didn't know what I did. So this year I started announcing our 8-man football games. It was a last resort is what they told me. They couldn't find anyone else. I said, okay, if you cannot find anyone else, I will announce football this year. And so about 2 days later, they come back and they said, well, we haven't found anyone else. I said, did you even try? And they said, no. So that's about how that goes, right? And so we're in the first night, we're in the game, we're in the press box, and I think I have everything lined out, and I remind another farmer that helps in the press box, his name's Dave Nail. I texted his wife and I said, don't let Dave forget his hearing aids, okay? This is vital. This is where it all goes downhill. So I'm prepping, I'm trying to figure out exactly, okay, do I have everything ready? I'm doing the music, announcing, and the first play happens, and I see who caught the ball, but I don't see who made the tackle. And I said, Dave, and he's right in the middle. I said, Dave, who made that tackle? And he didn't answer, and I said, Dave, who made that tackle? And he looks at me and he goes, huh? And I was like, all right, he forgot his hearing aids. This is a bad situation. So I sent an SOS text to his son. I said, can you please come to the press box immediately? So he runs up and he said, what's wrong? And I said, your dad forgot his gosh dang hearing aids. And it may have been a little bit more vulgar than that, was my term. Anyway, and so then from that point on, he started scouting for me. But I will tell you, I can't get away from the job. It will be in the middle of a timeout or even in the middle of a play. And Jeff, who's scouting for me, he'll have his binoculars on and he's looking out and he'll say, what the hell happened to the soybean market today? And I'm like, Jeff, we are not talking about soybean prices. I'm trying to focus on the game. But the personal side, I can't get away from it because I love it. I love being in a small town. I love being around family, even if my daughter at once thought that everyone just loved me because they loved their dad. But that's changed now that I've been been able to stay home a little bit more. So the transition, and I know we're not too far from John Phipps now, but that transition happened. It's hard to believe. It's almost been 10 years ago. So in 2013, John had decided that he was tired of driving the 3.5 hours one way to South Bend, Indiana to host the show. Totally get it. That is, every Thursday he would pack his bags, head to South Bend, get to the studio, do some work, stay in a hotel, record the rest of the show the next morning and hit the road. And it burned him out. Totally understand. So he made the decision that it was time to transition and he was going to semi-retire. And by that, his hope was he could still do the commentary, he could still do part of the show, but he wasn't hosting the show and traveling up every week. So he had said, I want Tyne to take over the program. Now, a lot has changed when I think about how much has changed since 2013, so in those 10 years. When he first brought it up, when you think about the people that have hosted the show before John, it was Orion Samuelson, Max Armstrong, John Phipps. Okay, those were the hosts before John. Now, he had suggested that I take over. So when you look at that chain, there's one that does not fit, right? And our executives were very clear about that. They didn't think I wasn't even 30 at the time. They didn't know if a young female could take over the show. Rightfully so. It had been a tradition, been on the air since 1975. But John advocated on my behalf, and then our leadership decided, all right, we'll give Tyne a shot. And so over that next year, I would host the show just once a month. And so for some of you that view the show, if there's one thing that I found out that you don't like, that is change. And I can respect that because I don't like when something in my favorite television show or broadcast or news organization that I like to watch or read, when there's change there. So I went and I hosted once. He would stay home, send in his commentary, and I would host the show. And so all was going to plan. Everything was going to plan until about 2 months after we decided that transition would happen. I found out I was pregnant with our first child. And the first thing I thought was, okay, now they didn't think that I could take over the show before. Now that I'm pregnant, there's no way they think that there's a new mom can take over U.S. Farm Report and host the weekly show. Well, kudos to my boss. He said he was so excited, and so it just kind of pushed the timeline back. And the week after I got back from my first maternity leave, I took over as host of U.S. Farm Report, and that was October of 2014. So as you look at transition, you look at legacy plans, I mean, kudos to John. This was a kind of his foresight, his vision. He wanted me to take over the show. He knew that I was pretty much writing everything anyway, but he wanted me to be the face of U.S. Farm Report. But at the same time, he was having that same transition on his farm. And today, I think he still struggles a little bit with some of that. What is my job on the farm? What is my role? I talk to John about once a week, and it depends on how many other people he's talked to that week as to how long our conversation goes. Sometimes I feel like it's 2 hours, sometimes it's 5 minutes, but I'm telling you what, I learn something every time we have that conversation. But that's kind of how the transition went. And in that time, I think about since 2013, 2014, that time frame, how much has changed in farming, in agriculture. You look at the technology, and we'll get into that a little bit. You look at commodity prices. I mean, I don't have to tell any of you. But you look back now, and this is the expectation for 2022 net farm income. And of course, we don't have those final numbers yet. But the expectation is we're going to see net farm income hit $160.5 billion. That is the highest since 1973 and 50% above the 20-year average. So when you look back at your own farm and you look back at some of the commodity prices, maybe you were able to lock in or not able to lock in. I should have sold then. I shouldn't have sold then. You know, all the things that you look back at 2022, you look at net farm income, and yields were surprisingly strong in a lot of areas, even in areas that we got planted late, even in areas that we saw dryness, but not everywhere. And there's still some problems out in the countryside that even I just heard about this morning, but there's some issues when it came to corn harvest. So here, was corn harvest pretty much on time for you guys? Was it about, and yields, were they average, a little bit above average? I mean, I've heard they were good. I talk to Matt Bennett from time to time, and so there's things that he tells me that I try not to spread your guys' story all over. But I know in this area, you guys, unlike Champaign and some of those other areas, you had some key rains, some timely rains that actually did your crop really good. Well, this last week, we got the final crop production numbers from USDA. So we'll look back at 2022. Not only kind of a look at kind of how the supply and demand situation is changing, but these are what's supposed to be the final numbers of the year. Now, there's an argument on are these final, when we'll probably see them change these numbers in the quarterly grain stocks report all the way in September. So some analysts argue, well, this really isn't final. But for now, these are the final numbers. These are what we have to trade. And there was a huge surprise last week. The surprise was that USDA revealed that harvested acres was actually down 1.6 million from the last report. So you look back in basically a month's time, and you ask the question, where in the heck did 1.6 million acres of corn go? Was it a miscalculation by NASS? Was it something that, you know, with the acreage report, we just didn't have good numbers then? Did they underestimate the impact of the drought in some of those areas? And based on the numbers that they released and the numbers that we have to trade now, it was that they underestimated just how much of an impact the drought had. Now in August timeframe, in early September, I started getting some calls from some farmers in Nebraska and made some calls myself. And, you know, the crop was bad in a lot of those areas, really bad. So bad that actually EPA had told them they were concerned about aflatoxin in some of that corn, that they had to dump it and get rid of it. They wanted to make sure that it did not enter the supply chain at all. And we knew it was bad. A lot of those areas were zeroed out. Even in Missouri, where I am, I'm north of I-70, and just south of I-70, that crop was poor. It was being zeroed out even middle of the summer. The drought, they just had no rain, didn't get good stands. I mean, there was a big challenge. And so now, when we get a grasp of just how did this crop shake out this past year, USDA tells us, well, the Western Corn Belt was even worse than what we expected, and we have 1.6 million fewer acres than what we thought originally. And then this morning, I got a call from an individual that really looks at the crop as a whole, but now there's concerns about aflatoxin in the corn in Ohio. So apparently, they took it out in less than ideal conditions. That crop's been sitting in the bin for a couple months, and now they're hearing of some real concerns of aflatoxin in Ohio. So there's the quality question now about this crop, that there's that then leads into a whole nother debate. Well, are we not really going to find out those actual numbers until the September quarterly grain stocks reports? We'll have to wait a while for that. But for now, this really shook up things. A couple other highlights from the report they did increase corn yield by a bushel. But think about it, when you take out all of those bad acres in Kansas and Nebraska, and I remember on crop tour, I mean, my heart sunk. It looked like 2012 in some of those areas. It was absolutely awful. Not only drought, but hail. So when you take out some of those bad acres that weren't harvested, then that raised the yield. So we did see them raise the yield on corn, lower the yield on soybeans, and then another big surprise came in wheat. How many of you guys planted winter wheat this year? So quite a few of you. Of those that said you did plant winter wheat, how many of you plan to harvest that wheat? Okay, quite a few. So there's also some questions. We saw, I think it was an 11% jump in winter wheat seedings. And you look at this map, and this is from Ben Brown at the University of Missouri. He does a good job after the report. He plugs in these numbers in his spreadsheet and is able to produce a map to show us just where we're gaining. And Texas, we did see some a large increase in winter wheat seedings there. But you have to remember that a lot of that area had cotton that had zeroed out because of the drought. They had a little bit of moisture then that hit kind of just in that fall time frame, but a lot of them had zeroed out their cotton crop, and so they came in and planted wheat. Some of them that I've talked to, from what I understand, is the wheat that they originally planted didn't even sprout that previous fall, and so some of that wheat actually sprouted from the previous year, which may have been a good thing because in those areas wheat seed was definitely hard to get a hold of. But the question now in wheat is, we had an 11% jump in winter wheat seedings, but how much of that will be harvested? You look at the plains area, and you look at the drought and the situation that we're in now. We're hearing about more rains in the west. We're hearing about some, we're going to switch, and now we're going to see, the La Nina fade. We're going to get into El Nino. What does all of this mean? But when you look at Kansas, you look at Nebraska, even look at the panhandle of Texas, where we see the large area of typically of where they plant wheat, it is still struggling with moisture. And there's some winter storms that are headed. It looks like we're going to see another winter storm this week, actually right now, hitting the plains. But it's going to take a long time to rid those areas of the drought. And so that's still a very real concern. But at the same time, you look at what we've already had this year and the bomb cyclone right now that we have in California, it's a good and it's a bad thing. So the good news is they're finally getting some moisture. And it's been a long time coming, but it's been too much at once. So these are some pictures that our friends at Dairy Herd had captured. And what's happening is, as the bomb cyclone was happening and all the rains and the wind and all of that, it was, for example, for these dairies, it was a lot of times ripping the tarp off of their feed, and so all of their silage was getting wet, and so it was ruining some of the little feed that they actually did get last year. And you look at some of the issues this year, even in the West, where there were some producers that literally I talked to some just a couple months ago. We had our dairy conference in Las Vegas, and I talked to a couple who I said, I wrote some stories on it. I've read different stories. How bad was it? And one young producer, he said, I can't tell you how many nights that I was up worried that we were not going to get our shipment of feed in. It was literally a day-to-day, hour-by-hour process because the rail situation was so bad, they were not getting enough feed in there for their livestock. So now you have this bomb cyclone come in. That's a good thing for moisture and hopefully filling some of these reservoirs. Snowpack is good, but at the same time, it's impacting dairy herds. It's in an area that's impacting a lot of the lettuce crop. So there is some concerns about what this bomb cyclone will mean. But Clinton Griffiths, he did have an interview just, I think on Friday, with a meteorologist asking, okay, now that we're seeing this bomb cyclone, we're seeing the moisture start, we're seeing some moisture in kind of the Pacific Northwest where they needed some moisture as well. Is this the start of a change of weather pattern? Are we going to finally see the drought start to wane? And he said, well, it looks promising, but we had a similar pattern set up right before 2012. And in 2012, right before we had that drought, we had a bomb cyclone that hit California and hammered that area, but did not kind of make its way over to the Midwest. And then we actually saw during the growing season, we all know what happened in 2012. So there's a lot of question marks. As we know, you can never underestimate Mother Nature, and you can never predict Mother Nature. So there's a lot of questions on this bomb cyclone, what it means and what impact that it'll have. But another challenge that I know I don't have to explain to any of you about is the supply chain and the headaches that it's caused. So a year ago, these were the headlines, right? You couldn't go anywhere. I mean, everything I was writing about dealt with the supply chain. Today, by a show of hands, how many of you feel like some of the, whether it be parts, whether it be chemistries, whether it be some of those that were in short, fertilizers, some of those that were possibly in short supply last year, that it's getting better? By a show of hands, how many would you say it is getting better? Slightly. And those are, last year as a journalist covering this, that was, I look back at it now, and it's always a question of you don't want to sensationalize anything. And from every single corner, that's what we were being told. There's a shortage of this, there's a shortage of that. Even before we saw Russia invade Ukraine, we were still having these supply chain questions. So now this year, from the conversations that we're having, it sounds like there may be some product in short supply. And if there's any BASF reps in the room, I'm sorry, they're probably going to come talk to me afterwards. But what I'm hearing is really what's the most concerning right now is glufosinate. That is the biggest concern right now is glufosinate. Glyphosate, we had the plant come back online in Luling. Thankfully, for diesel prices, for glyphosate, for all of that, we didn't have a hurricane that hit the Gulf Coast. That was really the pain point for glyphosate production last year, not to mention the whole situation in China. And so the other promising point is, as we start to see things open up, it wasn't a matter of, from what I understand, it wasn't a matter of manufacturing products, and there was a challenge in getting all of these products manufactured. It was just shipping them out. So all of this products that's sitting at the port, they couldn't ship out. And so as we see China open back up, it could be a can of worms for other things, but the gist of it is, from everyone we're talking to along the supply chain, that when you take one little link out, it causes a debacle in everything, and that's what we saw. So even with still the uneasiness, not knowing what's going to happen with Ukraine, with Russia, that because China coming back online, because of possibly demand here from consumers slowing down just a little bit, because of concerns about inflation, concerns about recession, all of that, that possibly we will get, really see this get worked through. But, I had an interview with John Deere just a couple weeks ago. I was at CES in Las Vegas, and I'll talk about this in a bit. Talk about an eye-opener. I mean, it is everything. If you are immersed in the world of technology, then this is a playground for you. But if you are just dabbling in technology, it is overwhelming. And that's exactly where I was. But I had a conversation with John Deere, and they said, at least now, some of these parts that they have been on, a quota on, that they couldn't get everything that they needed on, they are seeing those quotas kind of lift. It's not like everything now is back in play, but that they are kind of seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. But not only that, when you look at John Deere and some of these equipment manufacturers, a lot of it has to do with labor. And you can't forget that on the West Coast, we're still having some of these labor disputes. Sure, the rail situation, we've got that labor dispute. Hopefully that's fully behind us. And we saw that get worked out late in the year in 2022. But there's still some questions on labor at ports and what we're going to see there. So it's a conversation that I don't think is going away. But when I asked these questions last year on when they thought we would see the supply chain kind of go back to normal, whatever normal is going to be, because after the last few years, what is normal? So the question of when we will see things kind of go back to normal, the thought was, well, maybe it's another year. And in the conversations that I'm having now, it sounds like the end of 2023. Let's hope that happens, but there's a lot of question marks still out there when it comes to the supply chain. And another, fertilizer prices, those are changing daily. And so as I talk to some retailers and asking the question of, okay, what are your thoughts on fertilizer prices? Well, a lot of them is they are stuck with inventory now. That is, they bought at a higher price than what it should be at this point. And so it's a matter of working through some of that inventory that's at such a high price. But this was a study that was done by Texas A&M last year, and it was on nitrogen prices specifically, okay? And they looked at all of the factors that were really feeding into this quick, rapid spike, in fertilizer prices, up 81% in total, and that was a conservative estimate, really, when you look at that 81% that was done early last year. But of the total price hike that we saw, they found that $102 of it, or just 15% of that, was due to the increase in natural gas prices. So when you think about that and how actually natural gas prices, even today when we talk about natural gas prices and we look at where natural gas prices have gone and how they've come down a little bit, you look at nitrogen prices last year and it was only 15% of that was equated to the spike in natural gas prices. But why have we seen natural gas prices kind of fall out of bed at the end of 2022? And that's really what's happened. We saw, like today, natural gas prices are up 30 cents. And so, of course, we know the market fluctuates. But you look at that rapid drop in natural gas prices. And from everyone I talked to, the main reason is kind of Europe had a warm spell where they didn't use as much of the product as they needed. Now today natural gas prices are up because we're seeing that big winter storm go across the plains. It's going to hit, who knows, I've seen forecasts of 2 to 40 inches in areas of Iowa. So who knows who's going to be right. But when you look at natural gas prices and where we've come, it's solely based on, most of it's based on the fact that we saw Europe not need as much natural gas. And so every headline that you read of kind of last summer and even last fall talking about, are we going to see, a shortage of natural gas? Even some of those conversations that we had about inputs overall, it all goes back to the fact that natural gas prices, just demand wasn't where they thought it was going to be. And that's been a good thing. That's been a good thing in relieving prices. However, if you were able to pre-book fertilizer prices, I'm sure this is not a chart that you wanted to see. Another thing that we're keeping our eye on when you look at supply and demand is these eye-popping land sales. So August of 2021, I remember sitting in South Bend. I was back in South Bend. I was covering crop tour. And the biggest story of the week was not what they were finding on Pro Farmer Crop Tour that week. It was the fact that we saw a land sale that was almost $20,000 an acre. And it was crazy. I mean, it was just, we'd not seen any prices like that. How much higher can these go? What's fueling these land prices? I mean, that's the question in August of 2021. I specifically remember that sale. And then now you look in 2022 and you look at how much higher can land prices go, and you see that one for $26,000 an acre, you see $27,000 an acre. But in Nebraska, we saw a sale of $30,000 an acre. I mean, how does it pencil? That's the question everyone wants to know. How does it pencil? So I did talk to some land experts last week to just kind of figure out, okay, now that we're seeing interest rates creep up, now that we're seeing, some concerns of, well, are we going to see commodity prices hold? Really, when you look at probably each and every one of you, if I were to ask you what is your biggest concern in 2022, you would probably tell me your biggest concern is that input prices stay high and commodity prices don't. And that is the biggest concern, input prices this year, right? So as those concerns kind of creep into the picture, and maybe 2023 thoughts are maybe that it won't be as good when you come to net farm income as we've seen in 2022, where are we seeing land prices going? So my first question for this firm was, they did analysis, they looked at all of these land prices, they talked to different brokers. I said, who's buying? Who is behind these record land sales? And 75% of the land sales that they evaluated, the buyers were farmers. 75%. So back in 2021, when I had this conversation about that $20,000 per acre land sale, my question was, who's buying? It was split evenly. It was half investors, half farmers. But now, when they evaluated 2022 and those buys, it's 75% farmers. Now, what makes, and I'm sure many of you have been to land sales and seen it, what makes farmers, pay that top dollar? Well, a lot of times at these sales, it's not just farmers bidding. And so you have these investment firms, you have other, people bidding in the mix, and they're not all farmers. And so there is more interest outside of agriculture, and that's causing these farmland sales to drive higher and higher and higher. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to supply and demand. And what they told me is there's still not enough supply coming to the market to meet demand, which surprised me a little bit because, there's been a few some retirement auctions around us. There's been some more retirement auctions that I've heard from farmers in other areas where these, farmers are just saying, listen, it has been a challenging couple of years. It was really good in 2022. I don't know if it can get any better than this. Maybe it's time to retire. And it's time to maybe, sell some of our land, even some of these family members that have had this land for decades looking at selling. But the conversations that they're having is there's some that look at selling their land. There's some that go and talk to some of these auction individuals and really explore, well, what is it going to take to sell our land? But then they end up not following through with it because they can't figure out, what is going to be a good return on investment for all of the money that they're going to get from that land. And there's not another good investment really at the forefront today. You look at the stock market, you look at some of those other things. And so there's a lot of people that are talking and inquiring about farmland sales, but they're actually not following through with it just because of where am I going to put this money that I possibly make off of this land. So today, the whole situation is still supply and demand. And that will continue to be, the conversation this year. The caveat is if we see commodity prices wane a little bit, then a lot of these farmland experts think then we could see maybe, a little bit more pressure on the market. But we're not going to see these prices fall out of bed, and you're still going to see these one-off record sales for that piece of land that may be right next to your farm, and you don't know if it's ever going to come up again. We've seen a lot of that. And we've seen even though there's not prices up here from every area, I'm sure that maybe it wasn't a record near you, but you all have heard of land that you thought, wow, that is a lot higher than I thought it was going to go. And the farmland group that I talked to, in general, a lot of these farmland sales are 25 to 30% above what they expected the land to sell for. And so that's a conversation that's going to continue into the new year, and the future of farmland really all hinges on the supply and demand as well as commodity prices. And one thing I didn't add in there, the new thing in talking to a couple of the land experts that I've been interviewing, is auctions for cash rent. Is this something that's happened around here? Have you guys heard any of this? Cash rent auctions? Well, apparently this is growing in popularity. So now they're doing auctions for cash rent. And so a farmer that maybe was paying, let's say, $225 for cash rent before, there was one sale, a cash rent auction in Iowa, that it was $225 before, and then they did the cash rent auction, and those cash rent prices went up to $350. And so when you look at, just when you think things can't get any crazier, and I've still got to figure out exactly how widespread are these cash rent auctions, and I promise you, if I'm ever speaking to a group of farmland owners that aren't farmers, I will not talk about it, okay? We'll just keep this secret between us. We don't need the word to get out, but we are seeing the auction market bleed over into the cash rent side of it. And if that takes off and we do see a lot more momentum, who knows? Who knows what we're going to see on the cash rent side of the equation. But when you look at prices and you look at inflation, and I don't have to tell any of you that go to the grocery, if you're like how many of you do the shopping for your household? I'd like a show of hands, because I need to take this information back to my husband. This is not information I'm taking back to my husband. I took him one time to the grocery store last year, and this was the conversation. And I try to be thrifty, but I guess I'm not. So everything I would pick off the shelf, he would say, "Don't we have that at home? Did you check the cabinet before you picked that up? I think we still have bread in the cabinet." I swear, it's why I don't take him Christmas shopping anymore. It was questioning everything that I did. So I'm not going to, he's not allowed to go grocery shopping with me anymore. But when you look at prices, for those of you that have been to the grocery store, this is the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, that just came out last week. So the same day as USDA, if economists didn't get enough data, ag economists with the USDA reports, the whole slew of reports, let's just throw CPI out there to them as well, right? And there were some ag economists that I talked to in advance that actually thought the CPI data may actually move the markets more than the crop production data. But USDA surprised them. Nope, and USDA did their job last week apparently, and threw out some surprises. But these are the numbers that we got last week. You look at eggs. For those of you that do go to the store, I know I don't have to tell you anything. I went to a mom and pop store the other day, and for 18 eggs, it was $10. And my husband's like, "Well, why did you pay that?" I said, "Well, I really didn't have a choice. We needed this many eggs, and that was really the only option. So I did pay that price." But you look at eggs, 60% compared to last year. Butter up 31%. And this is David Ortega. He is an ag economist with the Michigan State University, and he really looks at the food side of the equation. But you look at lettuce, 25% year over year, flour, 23%, hot dogs. So you look at meat overall, and the only thing that was, kind of really was eye-popping was hot dogs. And we've seen the price of meat, and there's concerns about the drought impact on the cattle herd, and what are we going to see as far as beef prices this year. And there are concerns that we're going to see producers further liquidate their herds. When you look at the moisture that started, hopefully that's changing. But a lot of the livestock economists that I talk to, a lot of them say this year truly is going to be the year of cattle prices. And it makes me a little nervous because, as we all know, when everyone is bullish, that gets you really nervous. And every single livestock analyst I've talked to is bullish when it comes to cattle prices. But the thought is that we're just not going to be able to rebuild this herd quick enough. Even if we see moisture today, even if this bottom cyclone has produced enough moisture, we see these storms continue in the Great Plains, we see pasture and range conditions improve, we're not going to see these herds increase. And I've even talked to some producers in Iowa, some cattle producers who are starting to liquidate their herds this year and selling because they think, okay, cattle prices, this is going to be as good as it gets, and so I'm going to sell out. And so there's some questions of not only the supply side, when we'll start to rebuild that, but also the demand. When you look at consumers overall, these numbers here, you would think for the average consumer, it would sway what they're buying. It would change their buying habits. We've seen a little bit of consumers trade down, a little, but for the most part, every economist that I interviewed at year end in 2022, everyone was just shocked, surprised that we saw shoppers and consumers really not change much of their buying habits. And one put it as this: consumers tend to eat their way out of a recession. And so when you look at 2023 and the demand side, can we see this impressive protein demand hold? That is the number one caveat when it comes to cattle prices, is solely on the demand side. But hot dogs, okay, a side story here. Last week we had a team building activity, and we were at a place called Chicken and Pickle. It's pickleball, okay? Apparently pickleball is growing in popularity. And I also saw a meme that nude pickleball is growing in popularity. I do not recommend that to anyone, but I'm just letting you know if anyone needs a retirement gig, apparently nude pickleball is growing. So we're sitting there, and I'm with our sales team, right? I'm like one of the only content people there. It's our entire sales team. And sales team, they like a challenge. So the waitress comes up to us and she said, "All right, I'm playing bingo. If I can sell all of these items, or if I can sell these items tonight, I don't have to cook or do dishes." And we're like, "All right, yep, it's on like Donkey Kong. We can help you with that." And then she had to clarify. I said, "Are you going for a straight row?" And she's like, "Nuh-uh, I'm going for blackout, so I don't have to do anything extra." And I'm like, "Okay, we got you. We can do this." So then we're talking to her a little more, and come to find out, she's a vegetarian. And the most of our sales reps that are there are livestock sales reps. They raise cattle, they raise, whether it be on dairy or beef, there's one that raises hogs. So we get into this conversation with her, and she said, "Well, I'm a vegetarian, but the meat I will eat is hot dogs." And I'm thinking in my mind, are you serious? If I had one meat in this world that I had to live on for the rest of my life, I guarantee you it would not be hot dogs. I can guarantee you that right now. And so then we have a conversation with her, and we're like, "Why? Why are you a vegetarian?" She said, "Well, my mom always told me that I couldn't eat meat, that it's bad for the environment, it's bad for me. We're trying to educate her on everything." And I'm like, "Okay, I'm going to make a bet with you. If we help you black out your bingo card, you got to eat a piece of meat over there." And I figured she'd be like, "Well," and she goes, "Done, deal." So we blacked out her bingo card. She had to eat a piece of meat. She tries it, and she goes, "This is actually really good." And she goes, "What is this?" And we said, "Well, it's, steak, just cut up pieces of steak." And she goes, "Well, where can I buy this?" Are we serious right now? I said, "Well, where do you buy your hot dogs?" And she goes, "Well, I really don't do much shopping. I just go over and eat at my neighbors when they're cooking on their little," it is just, I'm thinking in my head, like, is this reality? Is there a hidden camera somewhere that's trying to get my reaction to someone telling me they don't even know where to go to buy meat? I am very confused right now. Anyway, long story short, after she tried it, she said it was really good. We had to teach her how to cook it inside because she doesn't have a grill, only her neighbor. And she said that she will probably go to the store and buy meat, but we had to write down what cut of meat she had to try first. What would be a good introductory, And I said, "Listen, if you think this is good, have you tried bacon?" Right? I mean, hello, even vegetarians are closet bacon eaters. They will say, no, I'm vegetarian, I'm vegan, but there's a survey that went out that actually asked, when's the last time that you had meat? And majority of them, it revealed that they had had bacon, but they didn't consider that a meat. I mean, all of this is mind-boggling to me. But when you look at talking to consumers and where we're going to see with demand, I mean, this is a lot of questions just hinge on inflation, where we're going to go, what we're going to see. And I mentioned egg prices, but this is a chart that USDA put out about egg prices. Egg prices in December were up 200%. 200%. And so you ask, okay, why? Well, it's a combination, again, of supply and demand. We saw highly pathogenic avian influenza that really hit a lot of the laying herd. Or the laying flock, the laying flock. And it actually equated, USDA's numbers show that as of December, our egg supplies were down 29%. But at the same time in December, think about what it was, holiday baking. If you're anything like our house, we did not bake any less this year. We actually baked more. I don't know who I was baking for, apparently the whole town of 800. But when you look at demand, it came at a time where we had a decrease of supplies, and a phenomenal demand in December for eggs, and it created this perfect storm where we saw egg prices where they are. Now USDA expects we're starting to see the flocks rebuild their flocks, repopulate. We're starting to see egg prices come down a bit, but that is the one thing, a 66% increase in egg prices, or 60% increase. That is the one thing that really, when you talk to consumers right now, everyone can relate to that, right? That and butter. So when you look at 2023. Now, I don't love policy as much as Jeff, but when you look at the policy priorities for 2023, and you look at really the ag angle of it, a lot of talk is, okay, are we going to see a farm bill or are we not going to see a farm bill? And some interviews that I've had recently, actually there's some optimism about the farm bill. You have G.T. Thompson, who has stated clearly that he wants to see at least a framework of a farm bill this year. He just named everyone to the House Ag Committee. That selection came out yesterday. There's some that have experience. But the question really when it comes to policy and farm bill, every commodity organization has made it clear. They want to leave crop insurance alone. But there is a question when it comes to disaster aid, and you look at the amount of disaster aid and direct government payments that we've seen. Now, nowhere near 2020, but when you look back at 2022, there's a lot of ad hoc disaster aid that we've seen, whether it be from hurricanes, wildfires, drought, even talking to the sorghum producers just a few weeks ago. They were lobbying, and we saw an announcement late last week at the Farm Bureau Federation annual meeting, but they were lobbying still for ad hoc disaster aid in those areas that had drought. They still said that was how they were going to keep their producers viable until the next year. So the argument right now is when you look at crop insurance, you want to leave that the thought is there's associations that want to leave that alone. But when you look at all these ad hoc disaster aid payments, is the Farm Bill working like it could be if we need all of these ad hoc disaster aid payments for producers? And that's an argument that we're going to see play out. I'm not sure exactly what concessions were given as we were trying to elect a new Speaker of the House recently, and we all saw that play out. But there's the question of what concessions were given, and will that put ag funding in more in a microscope? And so we will continue to see. But the big buzz, and I know all of you are hearing it, we're talking about it. Every single announcement that comes out from USDA right now, I don't know about you, Jeff, but there are so many announcements that I cannot keep up. And I'm not saying anything bad about this administration. It is just every day there's an announcement about funding. And for a journalist, it's a question of, okay, is this new funding? Is this funding that they announced 6 months ago and they actually just repackaged and this isn't anything new? And then there's some economists that fear that possibly all of this funding that we're seeing announced day after day after day, is that what is leading to some of the rapid rise in inflation that we've seen? So there's a lot of questions right now, but when you talk to anyone, if you look at where the money is going, it is climate smart agriculture. That is where the money is going. And right now, the World Economic Forum, they're meeting in Davos, and this, when I was doing some research over the weekend about kind of what the discussions were, and this was an article that was on the homepage of the World Economic Forum, talking about 5 benefits of regenerative agriculture. And if you get down to it, these are the 3 key points in the very beginning of the story. Regenerative agriculture is the way forward to decarbonize the food system and make farming resilient to climate shocks. Now, I will tell you, one word in there that somehow took off last year is decarbonize, okay? I'm not even sure how I can accurately tell you exactly what decarbonize, what they mean by that or how to quantify that, but decarbonize is the new buzzword. The other point, it won't happen unless we succeed in making it commercially attractive for the farmers, and farmers must be prioritized as key players in our fight against climate change. So when you look at the discussions that are happening on a world stage, it's not just here in the US that we're seeing some of these climate discussions happen, but you look at some of these areas where you've seen some of the protests break out. And when we were at the dairy meeting just a few months ago, that is the number one concern right now. Well, the number one concern is increasing costs. But the second concern is when you look at some of these climate smart farming practices or programs that are now being offered that you can get paid for some of these. Not all of them want to sign on, but they're afraid if they don't do so, then they're going to be in the same situation as the Netherlands and some of these other areas where then it's forced and it's not done on a voluntary basis. And so that is the underlying concern when you look at this. But no matter what discussions we see with Farm Bill and everything, it's all coming back right now to climate smart farming, some of these practices, and how much money is going into not only organizations and some of these projects to figure out what works and what doesn't, but some of the programs that may be unveiled, whether that be through public programs or private programs. But you look at some of these surveys on carbon, and there's still a lot of question. I'm sure a lot of you are questioning, okay, one, exactly what program is going to be the best fit for my farm, and two, I just don't have enough information. Some of these contracts, some of these carbon contracts specifically, are long-term. So you have to think about the next generation. You're not just signing that dotted line for yourself. It could impact your son or even your granddaughter. I mean, some of these contracts are over that many decades. And so there's a lot of, questions about really is the snake oil or are these carbon programs really going to do some good, and a lot of skepticism, and that's rightfully so. Skepticism definitely should be at the forefront of any conversation because there's so much coming at us so fast. But the one good thing about it is 2 weeks ago, I was at the Consumer Electronics Show. I mentioned that in Las Vegas, and I'm telling you, it is all the tech gurus. It's the latest and greatest. They had unveiled a flying car. Like, talk about Jetsons. Apparently, whoever wrote the story of George Jetson saw into the future that one day we would have flying cars, but they unveiled a flying car. I mean, everything's autonomous. And so John Deere had, and I'll show you kind of their display, John Deere had a display at CES, and it was a large footprint. It was a really large booth, surprisingly large, bigger than any other ag company. They actually did the keynote address for CES, which is the first time ever that an ag equipment manufacturer, or just agriculture in general, had the keynote address. And I asked the question of, okay, what is the future of ag technology? Where do you see us going? Is it going to be fully autonomous? Are we going to see electric tractors? Is that the future? I mean, some of you that are on social media probably saw the rounds of a post that said that John Deere was making some of these larger farmers test out these electric tractors. So I asked that question. And the boils down to this. Autonomy, they're all in. They've kind of made a down payment. They say you'll always have that option, but their goal is by the year 2030 that if you want a fully autonomous fleet, you can have that option. So they already have tillage, they'll work on planting, then you've got to get into harvest, spraying, all of that. So autonomy is one conversation. And a lot of the investments that we see now, you wonder, you think about how much has changed in the ag tech space in the last 10 years and how much hasn't. I mean, think about your own data on your farms. How much data do you have that you don't actually fully utilize, right? We all are in that predicament. Well, because now of the investment of getting better about data and all of that, it's kind of setting the groundwork that now we're also seeing a lot of money and a lot of investment come into the space. A lot of these startups that maybe were in Silicon Valley before are now making the way to the Midwest to see, okay, a vegetable farm is very different than a corn and soybean farm in central Illinois, right? And so a lot of that is changing. But the next question I asked was about electric tractors. Where do you see electric tractors going? Because I saw this post that John Deere was foreseeing this is what we were going to see. And they did unveil an electric excavator at CES. So got to see it. I mean, it's definitely, when you think about like a Tesla car and all of that, how the interior is very different. It's very different when it comes to an electric excavator. They said it actually works in construction equipment because it's not as loud, so you can communicate better. They said it reduces noise pollution, which I had never heard it put that way, but they called it noise pollution. But I asked him, are we going to see this in agriculture? And he said, in his keynote, he talked about the 8R tractors, and he said, when I ran the numbers on it, if you power that with a lithium-ion battery today, it's twice the volume, twice the weight, twice the mass, and 4 times the cost. That just doesn't pencil. And so they've ran the tests, and for right now, the tests show that it just electric tractors for the higher horsepower. He said under 100 horsepower, maybe it has a fit, and they're doing some more testing. But when you look at some of those that larger equipment, it weighs more, it costs more, and it's just actually, when you look at what you're doing to the soil and compaction, it actually does more harm than it does good. So those were some of the energy secretary was at CES. I watched her walk through the booth. That's some of the things that they say they're trying to convey, that electric equipment may work in some, but it doesn't work in all. Instead, they have seen the benefit of using things like renewable diesel. And when you look at where we're going with that, and you look at renewable energy, and whether it be soybeans, whether it be sustainable aviation fuel for jets, I mean, I think about getting on an airplane. And I do not feel comfortable, I don't know about any of you, but I am not going to be the tester for an electric airplane. I can tell you that right now. I will not be involved in that. When you look at the future and what's available now, John Deere says they are looking at more of the renewable diesel, and the question right now, or the problem right now, the hurdle right now, is just simply availability. There's not enough availability. And so as I talked to some analysts, this was the hot conversation last year at this time. Where are we seeing renewable diesel? Are we going to see it take off? And actually, just this weekend, I found out that there is a renewable diesel plant in California. And there's questions on when that's going to come online. But if that does indeed come online in May, like some expect, then that could be a significant boost for soybean oil demand that really hasn't been factored in yet. So it all depends on that. But right now, they will, when you look at just the supply overall, there's some questions about how much soybean oil we're actually going to see exported. But if we can see some of those plants come online, specifically watch that plant in California, if that can come online, then we could see a real demand boost here in the short term. So as I close things out, and when I look back at that time at CES, I was amazed not only at the amount of technology there, but how favorably farmers were viewed at CES. It was during the keynote, John Deere's talking, and John Deere said, we have farmers in the front row of this room actually here today. And you should have heard the crowd gasp. It was like Taylor Swift, Justin Bieber, I don't know who your cup of tea is, but whoever was in the room right then and there. I mean, they were amazed. And all of these individuals then came into the booth, and all they wanted to do was talk to real farmers and ask, there was a sprayer on display, and they said, is this autonomous? What are you doing in your field? I mean, the conversations were so positive. So for the longest time, we've heard, you've got to share your story. We've got to talk more about agriculture. But I look at CES and how much positive conversations happened, but also how positively farmers were viewed at that one event. There were some highly educated individuals there, and all of them were so excited to actually meet and talk to real farmers. And so when I look at that and I think about, what we've been told over the past decade that, just no one understands about agriculture, and, agriculture is viewed as the villain. Well, what I saw actually at this event in Las Vegas was quite the opposite. Yeah, sure, maybe they don't fully know about agriculture and we need to educate them, absolutely, but farmers were not viewed as the villain. Farmers actually were the celebrity at that event. And I will tell you, that was the most refreshing thing that I got out of all the tech, sitting down with John Deere's CTO for a conversation, all of that. My biggest takeaway was how positively that those that attended the Consumer Electronics Show viewed farmers and viewed agriculture. And that's a good thing. And so as I look the next year, what we're going to see, are we going to see, corn prices, just continue to climb higher? Are we going to see kind of these questions about demand, even concerns about ethanol demand? Are we going to see that play out a little bit sooner than what we expected? We don't know. We don't know what's going to happen with weather. We don't know what's going to happen with the markets. But I will tell you, some of the conversations that now are happening when you look at farmers, at all of the great sustainable practices that you've done on your farm. You've done on your farm for decades. Maybe we just haven't told that story enough. When I look at how that is setting the stage now for farmers really to be viewed as a viable solution, a solution today, I really think you guys are in the driver's seat when it comes to building those conversations and really building those relationships with consumers. I do think that 2023, with maybe possibly some challenges with inputs and everything, I really do think 2023 is going to be a good year just because of how quickly we are seeing those conversations change. So thank you for having me. Thank you for all that you guys do. And for any of you that know Matt Bennett personally, tell him that you would much rather listen to me than him. That is my only ask. Okay? Jeff, I've got to give Matt a hard time. I'm in his home territory. I've got to give him a hard time.
You absolutely should. And
he gives me a hard time. I'll tell you that.
I would share with you, though, he is in the process. Hang on. He is in the process of building that kitchen for his wife, but they're running into some issues. He says a difference of opinion between what the contractor thinks is best and what my wife thinks is best. And he said, I talked to the contractor and I said, dude, you're going to have to straighten up because she's taking it out on me.
Well, I'll tell you what I tell Matt. His wife, Tiffany, she's always right.